The night was quiet on Daniel Hayes's farm. The air was cool and the sky was full of stars. The field stretched far and dark, only the sound of crickets breaking the silence. Daniel had just finished his long day of work, and he wanted nothing more than to rest. But then he heard a strange noise coming from the old barn. At first, he thought it was just a raccoon or a stray dog. But the sound was not the same. It was soft, almost like a whimper. Mixed with a faint metallic crackle, Daniel grabbed his flashlight and walked slowly across the field. Each step seemed louder than normal, as if the ground itself wanted to warn him. When he pushed open the barn door, the rusty hinges groaned. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness. Old hay bales, broken tools, and wooden crates filled the barn. Everything looked normal at first. Then he heard the sound again. A weak cry, hidden in the shadows. "Hello!" Daniel called, his voice uncertain. No answer. Only the faint echo of breathing. He stepped forward. The light of his torch moving across the ground. There, under a pile of hay, something shifted. It was small, shaking, trying to hide. Daniel's heart began to pound. He knelt down and pulled the hay aside. What he saw made him freeze. It was not an animal. Not a child from the town. It was something else entirely. The figure was thin and fragile. Its skin pale with a faint silver glow. Large, dark eyes looked up at him. Filled with fear, its hands were trembling. Holding its chest as if in pain, Daniel dropped the hay and stumbled back. He had found an alien child in his barn. For a moment, Daniel could not move. His mind raced. This could not be real. Aliens were the stuff of stories. Of movies, not real life, but the child was there. Breathing, shaking, bleeding. It looked too weak to even stand. Daniel swallowed hard. He knew what the right thing was, or at least what the government would say was right. He should call the authorities, report what he found. But as he looked at the small alien child, he saw not a threat, but a creature in need. It was alone. It was afraid. And it was hurt. The child tried to speak. Its voice was soft, broken, like glass on stone. Daniel could not understand the words. But he understood the fear. He crouched lower, keeping his hands open to show he meant no harm. "It's okay," he whispered. "I won't hurt you." The child blinked. Its breathing shallow, slowly. It lowered its hands from its chest, revealing a wound glowing faint blue. Daniel's stomach turned. He was no doctor. And this wound looked nothing like anything he had ever seen. But he could not just walk away. He brought an old blanket from the shelf and wrapped the child carefully. It flinched at first, but then leaned weakly against him. The alien's body was cold, too cold, as if its blood ran with ice. Daniel carried it to a quiet corner of the barn and laid it gently on the hay. The child closed its eyes, but its chest rose and fell. Still alive, Daniel sat back, his mind storming with questions. Where had this child come from? Why was it here, alone and hurt? And most of all, who was chasing it? Because something in his gut told him the child had not come to this barn by chance. Hours passed as Daniel sat near the alien. Watching over it, every sound outside made him jump. The wind moving through the trees, the cry of an owl, even the distant hum of a car engine. He felt as if the world had suddenly turned dangerous, and maybe it had, just before dawn. Daniel stepped outside. The sky was turning gray, and the horizon glowed with the first sign of morning. He looked up and froze far above the fields in the sky. There was a faint light moving slowly. It was not a plane, and it was not a star. The light pulsed, then split into two, one bright, one dim, both gliding silently across the heavens. Daniel's chest tightened. He understood now something out there was searching. The child in his barn was not safe, not at all. He clenched his fists. He had made a choice already by not calling the authorities. But this choice would not be simple if he kept the alien hidden. Danger might come for him, for his farm. Maybe even for the whole town, but if he gave the child up, he would betray the trust in those frightened, dark eyes. Daniel turned back toward the barn. The child was inside, weak and waiting, and in the sky. Lights were moving closer. The discovery was no accident. It was only the beginning. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the fields in gold. Daniel stood at the barn door, his eyes heavy from a sleepless night inside. The strange child lay curled in the hay, wrapped in the old blanket. The wound on its chest still glowed faint blue. Faint, but steady. The child was alive. But for how long, Daniel did not know. He stepped closer, moving quietly. The alien's large eyes opened suddenly. Shining in the half-darkness, for a moment, Daniel froze. But then he raised his hands to show peace. "It's all right," he whispered. "You're safe here." The child blinked slowly, as if trying to understand. Then it made a soft sound. A word broken and heavy. "Kale," it said, its voice weak but clear. Daniel leaned forward, repeating the word. "Kale." The child nodded once, as if giving him a name. So now, the alien was no longer just a strange creature, was Kale. Daniel brought water in a tin cup and offered it. Kale reached out with trembling hands, long fingers curling around the metal. He drank clumsily, water spilling down his chin. But Daniel smiled anyway, because the child was fighting to live. There was something strong hidden under that fragile body. Later that day, Daniel walked into town for supplies. Every step he took, he felt the weight of a secret pressing on his chest. He bought extra bread, bandages, and even some old medicine, but he kept his face calm, trying not to look nervous. People in town talked as usual, laughing and gossiping. But Daniel's ears caught one thing that made his blood run cold. Two men stood outside the general store, their voices low. They spoke of soldiers searching nearby farms, looking for something strange. "They say a light fell from the sky," one man whispered. "And something came with it." Daniel turned away quickly, pretending he had not heard. But his hands shook as he carried the supplies back to his truck. Back at the farm, Kale was awake and watching him. When Daniel showed the bread, Kale tilted his head curiously. Daniel broke a piece and handed it over. Kale sniffed it, then tasted carefully, chewing slow. A small smile touched the child's lips, the first Daniel had seen. That smile hit Daniel harder than any weapon could. This was no monster, no invader, was a child. Far from home, a child who trusted him. Even if only a little, Daniel felt something stir in his chest. Something he had not expected, responsibility as the day passed. Daniel tried to clean the wound with the bandages. Kale flinched at first, but then stayed still. Watching Daniel with wide eyes, strange blue liquid oozed from the cut, glowing faintly in the shadows. Daniel wiped it away, wrapping the chest carefully. Kale touched the bandage afterward, and for the first time whispered, "Thank you." The words were broken, but Daniel understood. He sat back, staring at the child. Kale could speak. Not much, but enough to show intelligence, enough to show connection. This was no lost animal. This was someone who needed him that night. Daniel sat in his kitchen, staring at the phone. He could call the sheriff, end this secret, protect himself. But every time he thought of it, he remembered Kale's eyes. They were not eyes of a threat, they were eyes of someone hunted. Someone desperate, and Daniel could not betray that. The decision weighed on him like stone, as if the universe had dropped a choice into his lap. One that could shape more than just his life. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Daniel rose quickly, heart racing. He thought it was just the storm. But then came a sharp knock on the door. He froze, staring at the wood. The knock came again, louder, when he opened it. A soldier stood on the porch, his uniform dark against the night. "Evening, sir," the soldier said, his tone polite, but his eyes sharp. "Have you seen anything unusual around here? Strange lights, odd sounds, anything at all?" Daniel's throat felt dry. He forced a calm smile, shaking his head. "No, nothing but the usual," he said slowly. The soldier studied him for a long moment. Then his gaze drifted past Daniel, toward the barn standing in the distance. Daniel's chest tightened. "Mind if we look around?" The soldier asked, his hand resting on the rifle at his side. Daniel's mind raced. Cale was in the barn. Cale was defenseless if they looked inside. The secret would be over, he swallowed. Trying to think of an answer, the silence stretched. Heavy and dangerous. Finally, Daniel forced a laugh, shaking his head. "Barns just old hay and broken tools. But if you want to see dust and rats, be my guest." The soldier's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering behind him. 2 more soldiers walked along the road, flashlights sweeping the fields. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. If they searched, everything would be lost. The choice he had made yesterday was now being tested, and the night was only beginning. The soldier's eyes lingered on Daniel's face. The silence between them felt sharp, like a knife hanging in the air. Daniel forced his hand to stay steady on the doorframe. If he looked nervous, if he stuttered, they would know something was wrong. Finally, the soldier gave a small nod, but his voice was colder now. "We'll be checking every farm in the area," he said. "Strange lights have been reported, and we don't want anyone getting hurt." Daniel only nodded. Keeping his face blank, the soldier stepped back. But his gaze never left the barn. Then he turned, walking back toward the others. Daniel closed the door slowly, his chest burning from holding his breath. He stood there in the dark kitchen, listening to the crunch of boots outside. Flashlights moved across the fields, beams slicing through the night like searching eyes. For a long while, Daniel did not move. Then he hurried to the barn. Inside, Cale sat up quickly, eyes wide with panic. The child's thin hands clutched the blanket as if it could protect him. "Search," Cale whispered in broken English. Daniel crouched low beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I know," Daniel said, his voice low, "but you need to stay quiet." "No matter what," Cale nodded weakly, but his whole body shook. Daniel could see it clearly. The fear was not just of soldiers, but of something else. "Who are they after?" Daniel asked, trying to piece together the truth. Cale pointed toward the sky, his eyes filling with a dark shadow. "They hunt me," he said, his voice trembling. Daniel felt the weight of those words settle over him. Cale was not just lost, he was being hunted. The soldiers outside were not the biggest danger. Something far greater was searching, and it was coming closer that night. Daniel could barely sleep every time his eyes closed. He saw flashlights moving closer to the barn. He heard Cale's weak breathing in the dark. He thought of the wound, glowing faintly. And he wondered what kind of creatures had done this to a child. The next morning, Daniel found Cale awake, staring at the wall with a distant look. When Daniel placed bread on the hay, Cale barely touched it. Instead, he lifted his hand and pressed 2 fingers against his temple. A faint light flickered between his fingertips, blue and strange. Then Daniel saw something that froze him where he stood. Images appeared in the air, faint and ghost-like. They showed a massive black ship above the earth, its shadow swallowing the stars. They showed cages filled with beings like Cale, weak and silent, and then a symbol burning bright, an empire's crest carved into steel. The vision vanished, leaving the barn dark again. Daniel's throat tightened. "You?" Escape from them, he whispered. Kale nodded slowly. Prison ship, Kale said, forcing the words, Empire, take. My people, Daniel felt cold, if Kale was telling the truth. Then the soldiers outside were not working alone. They were either helping the Empire or unknowingly following its trail. Either way, if Kale was found, there would be no mercy. Daniel knew it, Kale knew it. The barn suddenly felt too small to hide such a dangerous secret. That evening, Daniel walked to the edge of his fields. The sun dipped low, and long shadows stretched across the ground as he walked. He saw something above the trees' dark shapes moving slowly. At first he thought they were planes, but then he heard the faint mechanical hum. Not from Earth at all. Alien drones, they floated with glowing red eyes. Scanning the land below, Daniel ducked into the tall grass. Heart slamming against his ribs, he watched as one beam of light swept across his field. It lingered too long, searching, waiting, then it moved on. Vanishing behind the hill, Daniel hurried back to the barn. Kale was crouched in the corner, his body tense. They find me, Kale whispered, eyes glistening with fear. Daniel grabbed his shoulder firmly. Not if I can help it, he said, though his voice shook with doubt that night. The soldiers came again. This time, they walked to the edge of Daniel's property, rifles at their sides. The sound of boots and radios echoed through the fields. Daniel held his breath inside the barn, one hand resting on a pitchfork. He prayed they would keep walking, but the sound stopped. A soldier's voice cut through the air. This way, he said, pointing toward the barn. The beams of their flashlights turned, shining against the old wooden walls. Daniel felt the world tilt. Kale gripped his arm, his whole body trembling. The child's eyes begged silently. Daniel tightened his jaw. He had made his choice the night he found Kale, and he would not give him up now. Boots approached, each step louder, heavier. The barn doors shook as a hand grabbed the latch. Daniel raised the pitchfork, his body tense. Kale crouched low, hiding beneath the hay once more. The air felt ready to break. Then, just as the doors began to open, a sound roared across the sky. It was deep, thunderous, unnatural. The soldiers froze, their flashlights trembling in their hands. Daniel's eyes shot upward through the cracks in the roof, and there, streaking across the heavens, was a ship black, massive, and silent. The soldiers stumbled back, shouting into radios. The barn filled with the echo of their panic. Kale's eyes widened, filled with both hope and terror. Daniel realized the truth. The hunters had arrived, and the chase had truly begun. The black ship had vanished into the clouds, but its shadow remained heavy on Daniel's heart. The soldiers had rushed away, their radios crackling with orders. They left the barn unsearched, too shaken by the sight in the sky. Daniel watched from the doorway, sweat cold on his forehead. Inside, Kale sat trembling, his dark eyes fixed upward. Daniel closed the barn doors and leaned against the wood. For the first time since this began, he felt truly small. If ships like that moved above Earth, then the world was not what he thought, and his farm was no longer safe. The next day was silent, almost too silent. The soldiers did not return, but Daniel knew they would. He brought Kale food and water. The child ate slowly, his hands still shaking. When Daniel sat beside him, Kale whispered a word. Alone, Kale said, eyes wet. Daniel felt his chest tighten. No, he answered softly. Not anymore. Kale looked at him for a long time, as if weighing the truth of those words. Then he leaned against Daniel's arm, small and fragile. In that moment, Daniel stopped seeing an alien. He saw a child, weak and lost, carrying a pain no child should carry. Kale tried to speak again. The words were broken, scattered like puzzle pieces, but slowly Daniel began to understand. Kale spoke of his people taken from their world. He spoke of ships that swallowed entire skies, of cages filled with children and elders, and of an empire that crushed anyone who resisted. His voice cracked with each word, but the truth was clear. Daniel listened, fists clenched in anger. It was hard to believe, yet the sorrow in Kale's eyes was real. Human history was full of cruelty, and Daniel knew empires well. But this empire stretched beyond Earth, across stars, and now? It had reached his barn. That evening, Kale pointed to his chest where the wound glowed faintly. Daniel unwrapped the bandages to check. The strange blue light pulsed weaker now. But Kale shook his head and raised a trembling hand. A faint shimmer appeared in his palm metal. Broken and small, it was a fragment of technology. Sharp like glass, but alive with light. Daniel stared as Kale pressed it into his hands. "Hide," Kale whispered. "Dangerous." Daniel wrapped it quickly in cloth. Hiding it under loose boards, he did not understand it. But he knew others would kill for it. Days passed in a tense rhythm. Daniel worked his farm by day, watching the skies. By night, he sat in the barn, speaking slowly to Kale. He taught simple words: water, food, safe, trust. Kale repeated them, each time with more strength. One night, a storm rolled across the fields. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder shook the air. Kale flinched at every strike, eyes wide with terror. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. Whispering, "It's only a storm, not them." Kale shivered, then whispered back, "Not storm." Memory, he lifted his hands again, blue light flickering. Daniel saw images rise in the air, a burning sky, lightning like fire, ships falling, people running. Kale closed his eyes and the images vanished. Daniel sat in silence, heart heavy. This child carried not only wounds, but memories too sharp for any soul. He pulled the blanket tighter around Kale. "No more running tonight," he said. "You're safe here," and for the first time, Kale closed his eyes without shaking. But safety was fragile. The next morning, as Daniel stepped out to fetch water, he found someone waiting by the fence. It was his neighbor, Mark, the friend he had known since childhood. Mark's eyes narrowed as they drifted toward the barn. "You've been keeping to yourself," Mark said. Voice firm. "Strange things are happening. And soldiers are crawling all over the place." Daniel forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Just trying to keep my head down," he replied. Mark didn't smile. Instead, Mark leaned closer, his voice low. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" Daniel's chest tightened. Mark was not just a neighbor, he was a friend. But trust was dangerous now. From inside the barn came a faint sound. Daniel froze, his heart pounding. Mark tilted his head, frowning. "What was that?" he asked, stepping toward the barn. Daniel quickly stepped in front. Forcing a grin, "Rats," he said too quickly. "Big ones." Mark studied him for a long moment, suspicion clear in his eyes. Daniel held his ground, praying Kale stayed silent. Finally, Mark stepped back, though doubt still lingered. "I hope you're not hiding something, Dan," he said, walking away. Daniel watched him go, his stomach in knots. The secret was cracking, and once it broke, there would be no fixing it. He hurried back into the barn, finding Kale crouched in the shadows. The child's eyes were wide, filled with guilt. Daniel knelt beside him and whispered firmly, "No matter what happens, I won't let them take you." Kale looked at him, lips trembling. For the first time, the child reached out and held Daniel's hand. The bond was sealed, silent but strong, but outside. The world was already closing an asterisk. The night after Mark's visit felt heavy with silence. Daniel sat in the barn, listening to the soft breathing of Kale. His mind raced with worry. Mark had seen too much, heard too much. A friend was now a risk, and in times like this, risk could destroy everything. Daniel closed his eyes, gripping the pitchfork in his hands as if it could fight shadows. Cale stirred, opening his large, dark eyes. "Danger," the child whispered softly, as if reading Daniel's thoughts. Daniel sighed and placed a hand on Cale's shoulder. "Not yet," he said, "but maybe soon." Cale looked down, his small fingers twisting the blanket. The following morning, Daniel worked in the fields. The sun rose bright, but peace never returned as he bent over the soil. He saw dust rising along the road. A jeep rolled toward the farm, painted dark green. Soldiers again. Daniel wiped his hands and walked calmly to the fence. 3 men climbed out, their boots heavy against the dirt. Mark stood with them, his face pale but hard. Daniel's heart dropped. His friend had brought them. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. "Dan," Mark said, not meeting his eyes, "these men need to search your place." Daniel kept his voice steady, though anger burned inside him. "There's nothing here but dirt and hay," he said. The lead soldier stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "We'll see for ourselves," the man replied coldly. Daniel clenched his fists, but forced a shrug. "Go ahead," he said, his voice tight. The soldiers spread out, moving toward the barn. Inside, Cale waited, alone and helpless. Daniel walked beside them, trying to think of a plan. If they opened the barn and found Cale, it would all be over. Every step closer made his chest feel tighter. The soldier reached for the latch. But before he could pull, a sound cut through the air. A loud hum came from the forest nearby. The soldiers froze, their radios crackling. Unidentified energy surge. A voice barked through the static. The lead soldier cursed, pulling his men back. "Stay here," he ordered Daniel. "We'll return." The jeep roared away. Leaving dust behind, Mark stayed for a moment, his eyes full of conflict. "Dan," he said quietly, "whatever you're hiding, it's dangerous. You have to think of yourself, of this town." Then he left, not giving Daniel a chance to answer. Daniel stood alone by the barn, his hands shaking inside. Cale's eyes were wide with fear. "They come back," Cale whispered. Again and again, Daniel knelt beside him, taking his hand. "Then we'll be ready," he said, though doubt filled his voice that evening. Cale showed him the small beacon hidden beneath the hay. It was no bigger than a fist, glowing faint blue. Cale held it gently, as if it were a fragile heart. "This? Call my people," he said slowly. "Signal, bring help. But also bring hunters." Daniel stared at this strange device. If Cale used it, Earth might be thrown into a war it wasn't ready for. If he didn't, Cale might die here. Lost and alone, both choices were dangerous. And both carried a future Daniel could not yet see. The barn grew dark as night fell. Rain began to patter on the roof. Daniel sat with Cale, watching the beacon glow faintly in the child's hands. "What happens if they find you before help comes?" Daniel asked. Cale lowered his eyes, his small voice trembling. "They kill," he whispered. "Always kill." Daniel felt rage rise in his chest. He could not allow that. Not to this child, not to any child. Cale looked at him, tears brimming. "You protect. Why?" Cale asked. Daniel swallowed hard. "Because it's right," he said simply. "Because you deserve to live." Cale studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The bond between them grew stronger. Sealed in silence, but outside, thunder rolled, and danger gathered like a storm near midnight. Daniel heard engines in the distance. He stepped outside, rain soaking his shirt. Down the road, headlights glowed. The soldiers had returned. This time, more of them, and behind them, A strange shape moved in the sky. It was not human, not a plane. It was sleek, black, glowing with red lights. An alien ship, circling low, scanning the earth with beams of crimson. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The Empire itself had come to his town. He rushed back into the barn. Cale stood holding the beacon, the glow brighter now. "They hear," Cale whispered. His body trembling, Daniel grabbed his arm, pulling him close. "Then we run," Daniel said. Determination in his voice. Outside, soldiers shouted, their boots pounding through the mud. Engines roared, radios crackled, dogs barked. The beam from the alien ship swept across the fields. Daniel pulled Cale toward the back door of the barn. The hunt had begun, and the world would never be the same. The rain fell harder as engines roared closer. Daniel dragged Cale through the back of the barn, his boots sinking into the mud. The child stumbled, but Daniel pulled him up. "We don't stop," Daniel whispered. Though his voice shook, Cale clutched the beacon tightly, its glow spilling through the storm. Behind them, soldiers shouted orders. Flashlights swept across the farm. Beams cutting through the dark. Dogs barked, straining against their leashes. And above it all, the alien ship circled low, its crimson light searching like an unblinking eye. The hunters were closing in. Daniel pulled Cale toward the forest at the edge of the fields. Branches whipped against his arms, rain soaking his shirt. Cale gasped for air, every step a struggle. But Daniel refused to stop. He had made his choice. He would protect the child. No matter what, a soldier's voice rang out behind them, sharp and commanding, there, in the trees. Gunfire cracked, bullets tearing through branches. Daniel shoved Cale to the ground. Covering him with his body, wood splintered around them, the air burning with gunpowder when the shooting paused. Daniel hauled Cale up again. "Run," he shouted. The two of them stumbled deeper into the woods. The forest swallowed them. But the soldiers were close. Radios buzzed. Boots thundered. Dogs howled. Cale's small hand trembled in Daniel's beacon. Cale whispered, "Must call now." Daniel shook his head, teeth gritted. "Not yet," he said. "They'll find us faster," but Cale's eyes were filled with despair. Suddenly, a red beam swept across the forest floor. The alien ship was moving between the trees now, unnatural and silent. The crimson light burned as it scanned the ground. Cale froze, pressing close to Daniel's side. "They know," Cale whispered. "They always know." Daniel grabbed a fallen branch and swung it hard against a tree. The sound cracked through the forest like thunder. The beam shifted toward the noise, buying them seconds. He pulled Cale behind a cluster of rocks. Both of them crouched low, hearts hammering in the dark. The ground shook suddenly. Daniel looked up and saw another ship descending, sleek, black, and deadly. Its engines roared like a storm. Mud and rain exploded outward as it landed. Soldiers and hunters both turned toward it. Their search tightening, Cale clutched the beacon tighter. "Choice," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Call. Or die." Daniel's jaw clenched. He looked at the soldiers fanning out with rifles, and the ships above, dripping with red light. He thought of his farm, his quiet life, the years spent in peace. And he thought of Cale, a child alone, carrying the weight of a broken people. The decision was heavy, but it was clear. Daniel nodded once, his voice low. "Do it." Cale pressed the beacon. It flared with brilliant blue light, brighter than the storm itself. The glow rose into the sky like a pillar, cutting through the clouds. The soldiers shouted, shielding their eyes. The alien ship above spun wildly, its lights flickering. The forest trembled with the force of the signal. Lightning split the sky. Thunder roared across the land. For a moment, everything froze. Then the soldiers turned toward Daniel, rifles lifting. "You fool!" One of them shouted, "What have you done?" Daniel grabbed a rock and hurled it. It struck the soldier's helmet. Knocking him back, gunfire erupted again. Sparks flying through the rain, Daniel pulled Cale deeper into the trees, weaving between roots and mud. Bullets ripped past them, but he did not stop. Above, the alien ship released smaller drones. They swarmed through the forest like metallic insects. Red eyes glowing, one darted toward Daniel. Scanning with a sharp beam, Daniel swung the branch like a club. Smashing it into the mud, sparks burst, but more drones followed. Cale stumbled, falling to his knees. Daniel lifted him into his arms, carrying him like a child. "You hold on," Daniel muttered, his voice fierce. Cale's head rested against his shoulder. Eyes half closed, but the beacon still glowed in his hand. Then the ground shook again. This time from above, Daniel looked up, his breath catching through the storm clouds. Another light appeared, not red, but silver blue. A massive shape cut through the sky, sleek and powerful. It was not the Empire's ship, was something else. Cale's eyes widened, hope sparking for the first time. "My people," he whispered. His voice trembling with joy, Daniel held him tighter. Staring at the descending silver ship for the first time, he felt the weight of humanity's choice. By saving this child, he had called war to Earth. Soldiers panicked, shouting into radios. The alien hunters roared in anger, their ships shifting to strike. The silver vessel answered with a blast of light. The sky exploded with fire, thunder rolling across the world. Daniel shielded Cale, his heart pounding. The battle had begun, and Earth was no longer hidden. Humanity was no longer untouched. The choice of one farmer had opened the stars, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night sky was no longer dark. It blazed with fire and light as ships clashed above the forest. Red beams from the Empire's hunters cut across the storm. Blue shields from the silver vessel flared bright. The war of stars had come down to Earth. Daniel crouched low, shielding Cale with his body. The ground trembled as explosions echoed through the hills. Trees splintered, soil tore open, sparks rained from the sky. Cale clutched the glowing beacon, his lips whispering words Daniel could not understand. It was a prayer, a call, or maybe a farewell above them. Drones swooped down with sharp metallic cries. Daniel swung his branch again, smashing one aside. But for every drone destroyed, two more replaced it. The hunters were endless. Merciless, Daniel's arms ached, but he refused to let go. The silver vessel descended lower. Its hull gleamed like moonlight, marked with symbols Daniel could not read. From its side, a ramp extended, pouring out figures wrapped in light armor. They moved fast, their weapons humming with power. They were Cale's people, answering the call. The soldiers on the ground panicked. Some fired blindly at the new arrivals. Others shouted into radios, calling for backup. But their bullets bounced off the shields of the silver warriors. The hunters in the sky turned their fire downward. Cale's people fought with precision. Blue bolts of energy struck drones and ships alike. Each shot cracked the night with thunder. The Empire's ship shook as fire spread along its black hull. The balance of battle was shifting. Daniel stared, unable to believe what his eyes showed him. He had never seen war like this, not on Earth, not in his lifetime. The sky itself seemed to scream as lightning mixed with weapons, fire. And in the center of it all was Cale, the child he had saved. One of the armored figures rushed to Daniel's side. Her voice echoed through a strange mask. But the words were clear. "Human," she said. "You protected him." Daniel nodded, gripping Cale tighter. "He's just a child," he said, his voice rough. The warrior tilted her head as if studying him. Then she touched a device on her arm. Blue light spread across Kale's chest. Healing the wound in seconds, Kale gasped, his body relaxing, for the first time since the barn. He looked strong. Kale reached for Daniel's hand. "Stay," he whispered. His dark eyes shining, Daniel swallowed hard. The warriors wanted to take Kale to spirit him away to safety. But Kale did not want to leave without him. Above, the Empire's ship split apart with a thunderous crack. Its black hull burned and fell toward the forest. The hunters screamed as their machines exploded in fire. The Empire had lost this fight. But Daniel knew it was only one battle, not the war. The Silver Warrior looked at him again, her voice softer now. "This choice binds your world," she said. "You stood with us. And now the Empire will see Earth as enemy." Daniel felt the weight of her words sink into his chest. He had known it deep inside, but hearing it spoken made it real. Kale squeezed his hand tighter. Together, the child whispered, "We fight together." Daniel looked into those eyes filled with both fear and courage. He saw not just a child anymore, but a spark of something greater. Hope. The warriors formed a circle. Their weapons raised, they looked at Daniel with respect. Not as prey, not as weakness, but as an ally. He realized then that humanity's future had changed forever because of one choice on one quiet farm. The battle above faded as the last hunter ships fled into the clouds. The storm cleared slowly, leaving the smell of smoke and rain. The forest was scarred, the ground torn, but Kale's people stood tall, their silver ship gleaming against the dawn. And Daniel stood among them, a farmer no longer hidden from the stars. The warrior leader turned to him, her mask lifting to reveal tired eyes. "You have earned more than survival," she said. "You have earned a place in the war for freedom." Daniel nodded slowly. His chest tight but steady. He looked at Kale, who smiled through his tears. And he knew he could not walk away. The sun rose behind them, golden lights spilling across the battered earth. The beacon still glowed faintly. No longer a cry for help. Now it was a promise. A signal that Earth had chosen, that humanity would no longer hide. Daniel placed a hand on Kale's shoulder. "We'll face it together," he said. His voice firm. The child leaned against him. Small but unbroken, the Silver Warriors lifted their weapons to the sky in salute. And far above, the Empire's shadows gathered. Ready for war, the quiet life of a farmer was gone. But something greater had begun. The bond between a man and an alien child had changed history. Earth was no longer alone. The future forever had been rewritten.